So our title today is called, Did a Calendar Change Affect the Weekly Sabbath? And it's part of a seminar series. The seminar series is called Animals and People That Rest on Saturday. In the seminar, basically the question that is asked is, what's so special about Adventists? What's so special about the Sabbath? And what's so special about animals that rest on Saturday? And those are the questions that we kind of look into in the seminar series. I shared this seminar a few weeks ago at Sacramento Central in the big capital city of Sacramento. And there I met a man, I forget his name, but it was an amazing experience. This man was a bodyguard to Ronald Reagan. Remember President Ronald Reagan? To me that was very special because when I was growing up, Ronald Reagan was the first president that I ever voted for. And this man told me of his experience as Ronald Reagan's bodyguard. He worked for the Secret Service. And he got to know Ronald Reagan a little bit and said that he was a deeply spiritual person who, I guess at one time, he had walked into him in the White House on his knees praying. And so, anyway, he was a special guy. And during potluck, a little girl came up and asked me a question. A cute little thing. I think she was probably 3, 4, 5 years old, just a cute little thing. I had presented at the church, I presented a message from this series called USA and SDAs in the Book of Esther. And so I had made the analogy, the illustration that Esther represented the Adventist church. And I made a strong case for that, I thought. And so during the potluck, little girl comes up to me and I'm visiting whoever and she kind of tugs on my shirt, my jacket and said, "Excuse me, mister." And I looked down, oh, the cutest little thing. And she said, if Esther represents the Adventist church, who does Mordecai represent? And I go, wow, what a high-level question. That's kind of not a 4-year-old question, is it, Sawyer? And so she asked that question, and I thought, I'm not exactly sure. I said, did you ask Pastor Thompson, who was one of the associate pastors there? She said, yeah, and he told me to ask you. So I said, I think he represents Jesus. If he had to represent somebody, I think he represents Jesus. And so, questions. When we do seminar series, especially in public evangelism, I like questions. Now, a 91-year-old man recently called me. His name was Charles. He called from, I think it was South Carolina. Maybe it was North Carolina. Charles, he called me up and he told me he had just watched the Seventh-day Beaver documentary. And he loved it. He said that was a great documentary. I really enjoyed watching it. He said, but I have a question. Now, Charles explained to me that he had Lyme's disease. He's 91 years old. He has Parkinson's disease. He asked me the question, he said, you know what, since there has been a calendar change, we really can't know what day of the week the Sabbath really is. And so that's one of the most common questions I get at a prophecy seminar, believe it or not. People, after they study the Sabbath, they get comfortable understanding that it is biblical, it is coming right from the Bible. The seventh day, Saturday Sabbath, is a biblical topic. And they say, okay, I see it in the Bible, but we don't know what day the real Sabbath is because the calendar has been changed. And how many of you have heard that? The calendar has been changed? Yeah, I've heard that comes up all the time. So how do we know that Saturday is the Sabbath? In fact, we can't know. This is what Charles told me. We can't really know. And I'm ready for this question. Here's my response to Charles. I said, Charles, you're right about a calendar change, the calendar being changed, but wrong about losing track of the Sabbath. We have evidence, scientific evidence, that bears record of this. And so as we do in our prophecy seminars, I shared 3 really powerful evidences that tell us that our Saturday today is the same day of the week as the Sabbath of the Bible. All right, the first evidence, and we call this the circumseptan rhythms. Of course, in a seminar series called Animals That Rest on Saturday, we share the story about the seventh-day beavers. Circumseptan, do you see the word sept in there? That means 7, right, in Latin? Here we have circumseptan rhythm. That's biological rhythms that are in 7-day increments, 7-day cycles. Circumseptum rhythms are 7-day biorhythms. So the beaver study that we've done and shows that the beavers, these animals that rest only on Saturday, they don't even come out of their lodge on Saturdays, I documented that for over many years in a study. They're not the only animals that have been studied. It's just one of many studies that show animals exhibiting peculiar behavior on Saturdays. At another convention, we had our little Seventh-day Beaver booth out there, and at a convention, we met a PhD scientist. Her name was Dr. Crystal Witten, and she was doing a study on how fast neurons grow in mouse brains. Can you imagine that as a study? She's studying this in a university in Texas, microscope out or whatever, however they do that, studying it, measuring it, writing down all the measurements. She's measuring this and documenting it. She said from Friday night sundown until Saturday night sundown, the growth rate was accelerated, significantly accelerated during those hours. And when sun would go down on Saturday, the growth rate would go back down to normal. And it was consistent all the way through until next Friday night. Then it would accelerate. And then Saturday night, as the sun would go down, it would go back down to normal, consistent all the way. And she studied this. And she wrote it down. She documented this. And so what's the significance of that? I mean, that's kind of significant. You don't really see something resting here, do you? You see accelerated neuron growth. What is a neuron? That's where the nerves, or the neurons, the nerve cells, communicate with each other, right? It's neuron growth, and then they grow. And so you see an acceleration of growth during those Sabbath hours. Why is that? Why do you think that would be? How would you explain that in a spiritual sense? Does God have something to do with that? I would think probably yes. I mean, God has everything to do with His creation. So here you have something growing faster just on the Sabbath hours. There's no reason for that, other than it must be programmed in there by the designer or a programmer. To me, what that may indicate is that during this, the Sabbath was made for man, and it was made for man to communicate with God. And we communicate with God through our brains, don't we? Our brain is our communicating, the computer that communicates. And just perhaps, maybe God made our brains to be enhanced and better able to communicate during the Sabbath hours. The Sabbath hours are made for communication with God. And so just maybe, I don't know, humans haven't been studied on this as far as I know. But it might be a good idea to study the growth rate of humans. I don't know if it would be painful. You stick an electrode, a Bluetooth electrode inside your brain. But so Dr. Witten shared that with me. She told me that she went to her professor and said, this is my study, and this is what I want to present for my dissertation to get my PhD. And then the professor, he told her, if you use that as your study, you will not graduate from this university. Now, why do you suppose that is? It's not a religious organization. Well, what would be the implications? Well, it would, if you publish this study, it would show there's no other reason for that to happen other than in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day He rested. It would suggest intelligent design, wouldn't it? And what happens to the theory of evolution that says there is no God, it's all naturalistic, everything, we came into being through naturalistic processes over millions of years. The Bible says that God created man about 6,000 years ago, total in conflict with the theory of evolution. The theory of evolution, if it was invented by Satan, I'm sure, just to throw people off and make them doubt the Bible, because that's the big thing. 6,000 years or millions and millions of years. The Bible's very clear. We were created about 6,000 years ago. And a study like this would suggest that just maybe there is an intelligent designer that designed it, and that intelligent designer is the God of the Bible. And what would that do to maybe some of the evolutionary dollars that are being poured into this university? I don't know. Maybe that's the thing. How many of you have seen the documentary called Expelled with Ben Stein? You got to watch that. Look that up. It's called Expelled with Ben Stein. It's about professors who lose their jobs, even tenured professors who are expelled from the university that they're teaching in for suggesting intelligent design. And so it's sort of it's powerful. Richard Dawkins is in it. He's got to be in it. Anyway, it's a powerful story. How many of you have heard about this Adventist dog while we're on the subject? This is Gary Roberts. He's with Adventist Aviation, or is it Adventist World Aviation? I think it's Adventist Aviation, but he flies. He told me that when he flies through the jungles in Asia, he says that he notices from just flying over the jungle that there's a significantly lower traffic of animals on the Sabbath. He says it's kind of rare to see an animal out on Saturdays. And then he tells the story, I think it was in your Mission Spotlight, I think last December, I'm not sure, but he tells a story about this little dog over here. The dog is called Dolby, and we call him, he's called the Adventist dog, because he is responsible basically for converting the whole village to the church, to the Adventist faith. What happened is two missionaries were out there. One was a pastor, one was just a missionary. They were in their tent out there in New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, and they both had a dream the same night. They dreamed that an angel was telling them to go to this certain village. They both saw it. They had separate dreams, just like Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar's dream. They both had the same dream. Well, these two people had the same dream, to go to this village. So they felt for sure, hey, they compared notes, let's go to the village. They went to the village, and they did their Bible studies, they did their presentations, their Sabbath presentations, and at the end, when they were ready to make calls and appeals, nobody was interested. Nobody from the village. They thought for sure that God called us here. Well, they packed up their things and went home. A few weeks later, the villagers, some of the elders from the village, showed up with Dolby, and they said, we want you to come back. Our dog, since you left, will not eat pork anymore. That's what they feed. And he will not hunt on Saturdays. And they had a meeting place that they met on Saturdays. And on Saturday, what he'll do, he'll go to the meeting place and he sits there all during the Sabbath hours until the sun goes down on Saturday, then he'll leave. He's been doing that, and they took that as a sign that we want you to go get those missionaries, bring them back. And they did, and apparently, I don't know if the whole village was baptized, but it was because of the Adventist dog Dolby here. Now, there are a lot of other studies, and we have planned a follow-up documentary called Animals That Rest on Saturday, because of all these stories coming in, and Gary Roberts is willing to be in the new documentary, Animals That Rest on Saturday. He'll tell his stories. Dr. Witten will tell her stories. We'll have a number of other stories from scientists. We've had some supporter from South America, a doctor who was doing studies, circadian rhythm studies. These are biological rhythms in creatures. And he was a big supporter of the Seventh-day Beavers. I hear from people all over the place. Since this documentary was released in 2016, I have people calling me and telling me their stories. Hey, I was out there and I was watching the hummingbird feeder, and wouldn't you know it, on Saturday, the hummingbirds wouldn't come anymore. I mean, they're noticing these little things. Got a call just, I think, 3 days ago from a friend, and I have the audio for this. A friend of mine named Dale called me up, and here's the message. He left a voicemail. I was on the road. I couldn't answer the phone, but I did capture the voicemail.
Larry, this is Dale Warren up in Corvallis, Oregon. I'm sitting here at the window watching, and any other day of the week, I could see swallows sitting around, one after the other, into their homes that we've placed up there for them. And they're just constantly flittering around. Now it's Sabbath, and I don't see a single one. I've sitting here for many minutes watching out the window for them. I don't see a single one working today.
And I get those calls, often, emails. Hey, this happened. Warblers. Some guy's talking about these warblers. He's a birder. He's watching the warblers. Hey, what's going on? There's no migration on Saturdays on certain animals. And so there's a picture of Dale. We just did a seminar in his church. That's why I had his picture in the Palm Springs area. And so evidence 1, circumseptum rhythms in biological creatures. That's evidence, isn't it? Evidence 2, and we won't get into this too much. In our seminar, we can go way deeper into this, but it's cultural studies of the dispersion of the Jewish nation to all parts of the world. We call that the Jewish Diaspora. Has anyone heard that term? Jewish Diaspora. That's sort of the cultural study of how this little nation of people have been dispersed so many times and then called back to their land. You see that in the Bible. You know, the nation of Israel was scattered because they disobeyed God and they were everywhere and they're in all nations. But then they reclaim their land. And that's happened even in modern times. And Jews are all over the world in different, and they still retain their culture. You know, I'm from Europe, I'm sure, somewhere. I have no idea what kind of mutt I am. You know, I know my dad had some Spanish in him and English, and my grandparents were German, but I have no idea what I am. That's not the case with Jews. Jews all over the world, they know they're Jews. And so here's a group of people dispersed all over the world who internationally recognize Saturday as the Sabbath day. I mean, it's been going on for thousands of years. This group all over the world recognizing the true Sabbath. They're not getting lost on a little island and think, oh wow, what day is that? And so anyway, we could say a lot more about Jewish Diaspora. But evidence 3 now is, well, how many of you recognize this building? This will be scientific evidence. You probably wouldn't recognize that building. My son said, is that the White House? It is a white house, right? It's a white thing. It's a white building. Well, this is the Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. That's the Naval Observatory. That's the, apparently there's a telescope sticking out of the top of that thing. Now this is where, maybe you didn't know this, but you probably knew this, Jet, but this is where time is set and coordinated for the entire planet. All of Earth's time is coordinated by that building right there and that structure, the Naval Observatory. So how do they keep track of time? How do they keep track of all this? They do it by, does anybody know? How do you keep track of time and how do you synchronize time? Is it from your hourglass where the sand goes down and you count them, or is it some, that would be very archaic and very unreliable, right? Is there somebody who has a really fancy watch that never goes dead and they just call up that grandpa and say, hey, what time is it? We got to set our clocks. Do you do it with your iPhone? Now everything is set by the stars. Did you know that? There's a certain star that casts its light as the Earth spins its rotation. It casts its light through a lens in that building, and when that light goes right over the crosshairs of a computer, it sets the time for all Earth to the, I don't know, what do you say? What's an increment of time that's really small? Millisecond? I think even smaller than that. But it comes across the telescope, the crosshairs, it hit the computer just right, and boom, time is recalibrated for the entire Earth at the Naval Observatory. It's amazing. This is an amazing, in fact, it'd be a good field trip for us, but it's so far away. So I showed Charles a letter from the Naval Observatory. These are the specialists in time, chronologists. They keep track of time. Somebody's got to do it. You know, your iPhone is set because of this building. That's how they set time for this. And we coordinate and sync our time. I showed a letter from the Naval Observatory. I share this in our prophecy seminars. But this is a letter that was, somebody asked about the same question that Charles asked. Since the calendar has been changed, we don't know what day Saturday really is. Time's been lost, hasn't it? And he's pretty sure of that. Somebody decided to ask the specialist in chronology, the specialist of time. They wrote a letter to the director, James Robertson, you see down at the bottom, wrote a letter to James Robertson asking that very question. And actually, the person who asked it, if I'm not mistaken, I see the name F.D. Nickel down at the bottom there. I know this is a little rabbit chase, but F.D. Nickel is the editor for the Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary. So he's probably getting questions from other people, and he decided, well, I'll just ask the specialist. So it's really his letter, and you see down at the bottom, F.D. Nichols. And I love F.D. Nichols. F.D. Nichols' work, my favorite Bible study tool is the Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary. Anyway, so he's answering the question. As to the question, I can only state that in connection with the proposed simplification of the calendar, we have had occasion to investigate the results of the works of the specialist in chronology. And we have never found one of them that has ever had the slightest doubt about the continuity of the weekly cycle since long before do you see it? The Christian era. What would that be referring to? What time in history would that be referring to? The time of Christ, right, from the Christian era. Long before that, we are sure of the continuity of the weekly cycle. That's the specialists in chronologies. Now here's how the calendar was changed. You know it was changed, right? The calendar has been changed. It's been changed many times. For instance, in 1582, when we went to the Gregorian calendar, you can see Thursday, October 4, was changed and dropped. 10 days were dropped off the calendar because they realized they're losing track of time here. Changed to Friday the 15th. Right, so you go from the 4th of October to the 15th of October in just one day. You lose 10 days right there. And you know, this is where the Gregorian calendar is where we get the leap years. You ever wondered about the leap year, where it started? Well, that's where it started. In 1583 was our first leap year, apparently, in February. We have a leap year. The leap year starting in 1583, as far as I understand. Okay, so that's one. There's another change here in 1752. Again, you see maybe 12 days were dropped off the calendar just because they realized the year is not synchronized with the days we have. So Wednesday, September 2, was followed by Thursday, September 14. But you notice in both those calendar changes that the continuity of the weekly cycle has never been affected. It's still Wednesday's followed by Thursday. Thursday was followed by Friday in the previous change. Now this is solid evidence that Saturday is still, we haven't lost track of time because of calendar changes. Now the specialists, the astronomers, I guess that's their field of study, this astronomy. If you were to take an astronomer, conk him in the head and put him in a coma for about a month or 2 months or so, and wake him up, as he woke up, he wouldn't know what day of the week it is, right? But guess what? If you gave him a calculator and a telescope, he could using his calculator and using some math and his telescope, he could tell you what day of the week it is, based on the stars, right? And that's, so in fact, here's some of the comments. Look at these comments from astronomers. Dr. Hinckley, the astronomer from the Watchman, he wrote, "By calculating the eclipses, it can be proven that no time has been lost. And the creation days were 7, divided into 24 hours each." And here's Dr. Totten, professor of astronomy at Yale University, said, "The human race never lost the septenary, 7-day, that's septenary, the 7-day sequence of weekdays, and that the Sabbath of these latter times comes down to us from Adam." So here's a real bold statement. Astronomers saying, not only can we go back to the Christian era, long before the Christian era, we can go all the way back to Adam. That's like 6,000 years ago. And we can line up the days and we can realize, hey, the Saturday we celebrate today is the same Saturday that Jesus celebrated, same one that God rested on in Genesis 2. Now this is science. Some more. It can be said with assurance that not a day has been lost since creation. And all the calendar changes notwithstanding, there has been no break in the weekly cycle. Another astronomer, Dr. Frank Jeffries. He's the director of the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, England. And I think I have one more here, maybe 2 more. "In spite of all our dickerings with the calendar, it is patent that, and patent means it is solid. This is solid evidence. We can get a patent on this because it's incontrovertible. It is a patent that the human race never lost the septenary, the 7-day sequence of weekdays, and that the Sabbath of these latter times comes down to us from Adam through the ages without a single lapse." The continuity of the week has crossed the centuries and all known calendars still intact. Now the Bible tells us in Genesis 1:14, this is where it comes from. This is astronomy in the beginning. Genesis 1:14, God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night," and what else? "Let them be for signs, for seasons, for days, and for years." So what does he say? Let what be for signs and times and seasons and years? The stars, right? The stars are fixed in their place. God fixed them in there so we can tell what day of the week it is. So that when you come to a Revelation seminar and you're kind of curious, somebody told you that you'll have no idea what day the Sabbath is, you can look at the stars, and the specialists that know how to read the stars, they can tell you today is actually Saturday. This is actually a Sabbath of the Bible. There was another little story. We had a booth for the beaver thing, and a guy came up to me and told me about a story about an elephant that wouldn't. It was an actor elephant, and he had a trainer, and they used this in commercials and movie shoots and stuff like this. That's what the elephant's job was. Pepsi approached this guy, and they wanted to do a Pepsi commercial, and so he told them that they needed 4 days to shoot. We need 4 days. He said, well, let's see here. You better come no later than Tuesday because my elephant won't do anything on Saturday. And that was true. So they shot a Pepsi commercial. The elephant will work. He'll do whatever you want him to do. Sit, stand, one leg, the trunk, whatever. Pick up the log or pick up the man, put him on, But on Saturday, he says, forget it. That elephant is retired on Saturdays. So that's just another one of many, many stories. So when God said, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy, and we say, we have no idea what day the Sabbath is. Does that make sense? Would God tell us to do something and not give us the ability to do it? How many of you have heard the saying, God's biddings are God's enablings? Have you heard that? God's biddings are God's enablings. In other words, inherent with a commandment from God is the power to perform that command. When God said, let there be light, was there any choice? Was there any debate in the matter? Let the dry land appear. Let trees be, and man, let there be man. All the things that God says, when He spoke it, it came into existence. There's no choice. And when He said, remember the Sabbath day, do you think it's possible that you can remember the Sabbath day? Got an email from a guy named Louis in Florida. He had just seen the beaver study came out, and he wrote this. He said, thank you so much again for the beaver study. What you have done has changed my life. It's very hard to explain, but I needed to know if the true Sabbath day was on Saturday or if man messed up, and I had to edit that word a little bit, if man messed up the days through the years. People want to know this. As we study our Bibles, Revelation 13, Revelation 14, we find that the Sabbath plays a significant role, a highly significant role in end-time prophecy, doesn't it? The Sabbath turns out to be a sign of loyalty to our Creator, a Creator who cared enough to give us rest. And that during that rest, it's time to spend with Him, isn't it? When I heard this message about the Sabbath, I was impressed that there's a God that loves me enough to give me a day, one day out of every 7, to spend time with Him. And so I want to enter into that rest.